The air hung heavy, thick with the acrid tang of ozone and burnt electronics, a smell that had become as familiar to me as my own breath. Yellow tape, stretched taut, crisscrossed the entrance to what was once the pinnacle of advanced research, now a testament to violent entropy. I ducked under the barrier, my boots crunching on scattered glass and plaster dust as I stepped into the silence of the devastation. "Reid. Glad you're here." The lead investigator, a man whose patience wore thin with every passing hour, nodded curtly from across the main chamber. His gaze was already weary, fixed on the charred remains of a central console. "Looks like a cleanup job. Catastrophic energy release. We've got the preliminary reports from the facility's internal systems. Pressure surge, thermal runaway. Textbook accident, or a very desperate act." I didn't respond, my eyes already tracing the lines of destruction. Dr. Aris Thorne's bioengineering lab, a fortress of innovation, now resembled a war zone. Twisted metal beams jutted from collapsed ceilings, their structural integrity compromised. Banks of monitors, once glowing with complex data, were now shattered mosaics of black and silver. The floor was a minefield of debris, circuit boards, shattered vials, and unidentifiable fragments of what had once been cutting-edge equipment. My gaze settled on the center of the room, where the remains of the bioengineer lay. A tarp covered most of it, but the outline was unmistakable. The blast had been centered here, near the main containment unit, or what was left of it. The lead investigator was right, the evidence screamed accident, or a deliberate self-destruction. The facility's security logs indicated no external breach. No forced entry. Just Thorne, alone, with his groundbreaking work. Initial assessment points to a containment failure of some kind, the lead investigator continued, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. The energy signature is consistent with the experimental compounds Thorne was working with. Highly volatile. One wrong calculation. He trailed off, the implication clear. Thorne, a genius, but perhaps a reckless one. Or, perhaps, a man overwhelmed by the weight of his own creations. I pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, the sterile latex a stark contrast to the grime accumulating on everything else. My kit bag felt heavy, packed with the tools of meticulous dissection. "I'll start with the blast radius, work my way out," I murmured, more to myself than to him. I ignored the exasperated sigh that followed. They wanted speed. I wanted truth, even if it meant digging through a mountain of lies, or simply, unfortunate circumstances. The air conditioning system, miraculously, still hummed faintly, circulating the metallic scent of burnt copper and something else, something subtly organic, like scorched protein. I moved slowly, methodically, my eyes scanning every surface, every shadow. The general devastation was overwhelming, designed to obscure, to blend into a narrative of chaos. But chaos, true chaos, rarely left perfect patterns. My gaze drifted to a heavily reinforced console, a data interface unit that seemed to have partially survived the main blast. Its thick casing was buckled, warped by intense heat, but a section of its display panel remained, a ghost of its former functionality. Most of the plastic surrounding it had melted, fused into grotesque drips. But something was off. I knelt, my knees protesting against the gritty floor. The scorch marks on the console were intense, radiating outwards from a central point. Standard thermal damage, consistent with an explosion. but on the very edge of the surviving display, a small, almost surgical burn caught my eye. It was a precise, circular mark, no larger than a coin, etched into the polycarbonate. Unlike the surrounding, amorphous melting, this mark was sharp, defined, as if a focused beam of extreme heat had impacted that exact spot. It wasn't random. It wasn't collateral. I ran a gloved finger over the mark, feeling the subtle raised lip of melted and resolidified material. The edges were too clean, too deliberate for the chaotic spread of a thermal runaway. If the explosion had originated from the containment unit, why this pinpoint burn here, on a peripheral piece of equipment, almost as an afterthought? Or, perhaps, as a precursor? My mind began to sift through possibilities, discarding the easy explanations. An accident would produce widespread, generalized thermal patterns. Suicide by explosion would still follow the physics of an uncontrolled reaction. But this was different. This suggested a directed application of energy, a specific intent. It was like finding a single, perfectly cut diamond amidst a pile of shattered glass. I pulled out my microsampling kit, carefully collecting a residue from the center of the pinpoint burn. The material felt slightly different under the swab, almost crystalline. This sample, along with others I'd collect, would eventually make its way to the police department basement holding forensic samples, where the true nature of its composition might be revealed. But even before the lab reports came back, my gut tightened. It spoke of precision, of control, of something far more calculated than a tragic miscalculation. The tension in the room, previously defined by the scale of destruction, now sharpened, focusing into a single, almost imperceptible point of suspicion. The case, I realized, was anything but textbook. I traced the edge of the official seal with my thumb, the paper cool beneath my skin. The initial findings, delivered by the medical examiner, painted a picture of catastrophic blunt force trauma, severe thermal burns, and internal organ damage consistent with a high-yield energetic event. A lab accident, just as suspected. But the devil, as always, was in the details. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the precinct's ventilation system a dull counterpoint to the insistent buzz in my mind. The report detailed the primary cause of death, yes, but then it veered into the anomalies. Thorne's left hand, for instance, showed a concentrated burn pattern, almost surgical in its precision, that didn't align with the broader, more chaotic blast injuries across the rest of his body. It was too localized, too clean. And his right arm, oddly, had fewer severe burns than expected for someone caught in such an inferno. It was as if he'd been shielding something, or perhaps, something had shielded him. Then there was the real kicker, buried deep within the toxicology and trace evidence sections. A unique, non-lab-related element. Not a chemical compound from Thorne's experimental bioreactor, not a residue from the advanced polymers he worked with, but something organic. A specific type of pollen, minute and resilient, clinging to the fibers of Thorne's undergarments, unaffected by the intense heat. Salix herbacea, the report stated, dwarf willow pollen. A plant that thrived in alpine and Arctic environments, not the controlled, sterile confines of Thorne's state-of-the-art facility. My brow furrowed. How did something from a mountain peak end up on a man incinerated in a lab? It didn't just deepen my suspicions, it carved them into stone. This wasn't an accident. This was a story with too many contradictory chapters. I gathered the relevant evidence bags, the crisp plastic crinkling under my grip. The air down there was always cooler, heavy with the sterile scent of cleaning agents and the faint, metallic tang of preserved evidence. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a clinical glow on rows of metal shelving units, each compartment meticulously labeled. I found Thorne's personal effects, or what remained of them, laid out on a stainless steel table. His singed wallet, a melted watch, the remnants of his clothing. I picked up the small evidence bag containing the dwarf willow pollen, holding it up to the light. Tiny, almost invisible specks. It wasn't something you'd pick up walking through a city park. It suggested a recent, direct contact with a very specific, remote environment. Had Thorne been somewhere before the lab? Or had someone else brought it in? The possibilities twisted into a knot in my gut. This wasn't just about a brilliant mind's demise, it was about a calculated deception, a killer covering their tracks with an almost arrogant precision. My next move was to peel back the layers of Thorne's professional life. A man with his intellect and ambition was bound to leave a trail of admirers and detractors. I started with the latter. Thorne wasn't exactly known for his collaborative spirit, the detective assigned to assist me offered, adjusting his tie as we walked toward the interview rooms. More of a lone wolf, brilliant, sure. He burned a few bridges. My first interview was with a representative from the corporate funding agency. He confirmed what I already suspected. Thorne's research was on the cusp of something revolutionary, something with global implications. He also, rather pointedly, brought up Dr. Silas Vance, a rival scientist from a competing institution. Vance always felt Thorne was stealing his thunder, the representative explained, his voice flat. Their work overlapped significantly, and Vance's project was perpetually a step behind Thorne's. There were whispers of sabotaged data, funding disputes. Vance is fiercely competitive. I pictured Vance, an intellectual predator, always circling, always looking for an advantage. A man who might see Thorne's accident as an opportunity to finally claim the spotlight. The tension in the room thickened with unspoken accusations. Next, I tracked down Maya, a former research assistant who had worked closely with Thorne for years before her abrupt departure a few months prior. He was a different kind of anger. Her hands, I noticed, trembled slightly as she spoke, clutching a worn leather bag. He was ruthless, she said, her voice tight. Barely above a whisper. He'd discard anyone who didn't fit into his vision, no matter how much they'd given him. She'd been dismissed, she claimed, for questioning some of his more unorthodox methodologies, methods she felt bordered on unethical. I knew too much, he said. Knew too much about the shortcuts he was taking, the risks. He was obsessed with results, with being first. The resentment in her eyes was palpable. She spoke of Thorne's increasingly secretive work, the long hours he spent alone in the lab, the layers of security he'd added. She knew the lab's layout, its protocols, its vulnerabilities. She knew Thorne's habits, his temper, his ambition. He had motive, access, and a deep-seated grievance. He could have easily orchestrated something subtle, something designed to look like a tragic oversight. As I left the interview room, the two figures, the ambitious rival scientist, Vance, and the embittered former assistant, Maya, spun in my mind. Both had plausible motives, both had knowledge that could be weaponized. The dwarf willow pollen, the precise burn, the carefully crafted chaos, it all pointed to a killer who understood Thorne's world intimately, someone who had waited for the perfect moment to strike, leaving a signature so subtle, only the most meticulous eye would ever truly see it. And I was seeing it. The resentment in the assistant's eyes was a cold ember, still burning in my memory as I drove away from the research facility. She'd known Thorne's habits, his temper, his ambition, and the labyrinthine security of his lab. That kind of intimacy, coupled with palpable bitterness, was a volatile mix. It was a detail I wouldn't forget, a thread waiting to be pulled. My next stop was less about human interaction and more about digital ghosts. Fluorescent lights, caged behind wire mesh, cast a flat, unwavering glare on the metal shelves stacked with evidence boxes. This wasn't a place for secrets to hide for long, especially not digital ones. I settled into a workstation, a heavy-duty terminal hooked directly to the confiscated drives from Thorne's lab. The lead investigator, a meticulous man with perpetually furrowed brow, had ensured the chain of custody was ironclad. He'd also given me full rein, understanding that some secrets weren't revealed by a simple search function. Thorne's digital footprint was immense. Years of research, experimental data, design schematics for custom equipment, and layers upon layers of proprietary code. His focus, from what I could discern from the file names, centered on advanced genetic sequencing. The implications were staggering: potential breakthroughs in global health, or, in the wrong hands, tools of unimaginable destruction. My fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating encrypted directories, bypassing security protocols that Thorne himself had likely designed. It was a digital cat-and-mouse game, and Thorne, even in death, was proving a formidable opponent. My eyes, accustomed to the strain, picked out patterns, deviations, whispers in the static. I was looking for anything out of place, a digital fingerprint left by an intruder, or perhaps, by Thorne himself, attempting to erase his tracks. And then, I found it. A series of access logs, deep within a highly restricted project directory labeled Aris_protocol. They showed activity that simply didn't align. Thorne's usual login patterns were predictable, almost ritualistic. But here, there were anomalies: a brief, unscheduled access window 2 days before his death, followed by a flurry of data transfer requests. Not just downloads, but uploads. And then, the attempts to overwrite specific project files. It wasn't a crude deletion, easily recoverable. This was sophisticated. A digital sleight of hand. The timestamps on these overwrites were the most damning detail. They occurred after Thorne's last known activity, but before the lab's automated shutdown sequence initiated by the incident. Someone had been in there, digitally speaking, in the critical window between Thorne's demise and the arrival of the first responders. Or, more unsettlingly, Thorne himself had set a timed script to execute after his death, but why? My breath hitched. This wasn't a lab accident. This wasn't a simple suicide. This was a deliberate, calculated act. The precision of the data manipulation pointed to someone intimately familiar with Thorne's systems, someone who knew precisely which files to target, and how to make them vanish. My mind immediately went back to the assistant, her knowledge of the lab's vulnerabilities. I leaned back, rubbing the grit from my eyes. The implications settled heavily. If Thorne was hiding something, what was it? And if someone else was doing the hiding, what did they stand to gain? The tension in my shoulders tightened, a familiar companion. I needed to talk to the assistant again. Her fear, her vague answers, they suddenly felt less like resentment and more like genuine apprehension. I found the assistant in a quiet corner of the facility's administrative offices, away from the main bustle. She clutched a mug of lukewarm tea, her knuckles white. She didn't offer a greeting, just my name, a question mark hanging unspoken in the air. "I need to ask you a few more questions about Thorne's recent work," I began, keeping my tone level, non-confrontational. "Specifically, about his security protocols. Any unusual activity you might have noticed on the network." She flinched, her gaze darting towards the door, then back to me, wary. Unusual activity? He was always tinkering. Adding new firewalls, encrypting more layers. He was obsessive about it, especially these last few months. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea, her eyes fixed on the ceramic rim. Did he ever mention feeling watched? Or that someone was trying to access his research? Her grip tightened on the mug. He just got more paranoid. That's the only way to describe it. He'd mutter about breaches and unauthorized eyes. He even started doing manual checks on the servers himself, late at night, when he thought no one else was around. Said he couldn't trust the automated logs anymore. Said they could be manipulated. My internal alarm bells blared. Manipulated. Did he ever tell you what he was looking for? Or who he suspected? She shook her head, a tremor running through her. No. Just that they were getting closer. He'd lock himself away for days, sometimes, just with his terminal. He said his work was too important, too dangerous, to fall into the wrong hands. He spoke of having to cleanse certain data, to protect it, even from himself. Cleansing data. That was an unnerving echo of what I'd found on the drives. Her vague remarks now clicked into place, painting a disturbing picture. Thorne, increasingly paranoid, distrusting his own systems, perhaps attempting to wipe data himself. Or, an outside party, exploiting his paranoia, mimicking his methods to cover their own tracks. Either way, the accidental lab explosion was looking less and less like the truth. The tension in the room thickened, palpable, as the implications of her words intertwined with the digital evidence I just unearthed. I leaned over a high-resolution spectral analyzer, my eyes locked on the monitor, the faint, almost invisible residue from Thorne's lab coat magnified 1,000 times. The residue, a minute fleck clinging to the fibers, was the ghost of a clue, a whisper against the roar of the official narrative. My mind replayed the last words of the facility manager, the unsettling phrase, cleansing data. Thorne, a man who built his life on precision, on absolute control, yet his systems were compromised. Or, perhaps, he was trying to clean up his own mess. That idea had gnawed me, but the sheer meticulousness of the lab's destruction felt external. No, Thorne wouldn't have left such a precise, deliberate signature of self-sabotage. And that microscopic trace, this almost nothing, felt like a deliberate oversight, or an unavoidable consequence. The spectral analysis software, a labyrinth of algorithms and comparative databases, finally spat out a result. A unique spectral signature, a precise pattern of light absorption and emission that didn't match anything in our standard forensic libraries. I ran it again, double-checking the calibration, the sample integrity. The same result. My fingers tapped a rhythm on the cold metal casing of the analyzer. This wasn't an organic compound. It wasn't a common industrial material. It was something else entirely. I cross-referenced the signature against more specialized databases, those compiled from cutting-edge materials science and advanced manufacturing. The hum of the machinery, the quiet rustle of my own movements, were the only sounds. Then, a match. A rare, synthetic polymer. The database entry was sparse, highly restricted, but the few details available were enough. This wasn't just any polymer, it was a proprietary compound, engineered for extreme durability and specific thermal resistance in high-end industrial applications. A material designed to withstand conditions far beyond what a typical research lab accident would produce. This changed everything. The initial theories, a catastrophic miscalculation, a desperate act of self-destruction, crumbled under the weight of this single-minute detail. This polymer wasn't something Thorne would have been working with in his biological research. It was an anomaly, a foreign body in a sterile environment. It pointed a finger not at the scientist himself, but at an external force, at an entity with access to highly specialized, expensive materials. My thoughts immediately jumped to the funding. Thorne's groundbreaking work, even in its reclusive state, required substantial capital. And the primary backer, the deep pockets behind his genius, was Omnicorp. A conglomerate known for its aggressive R&D, its voracious appetite for innovation, and its history of acquiring, or sometimes simply absorbing, promising ventures. They had the resources. They had the motive. And now, they potentially had the means. The investigation had just expanded from a contained tragedy to a corporate labyrinth. I gathered my notes, the spectral printout clutched in my hand. My determination, which had wavered slightly in the face of Thorne's apparent paranoia, solidified. This was no accident. This was a meticulously planned execution, hidden behind a veil of scientific disaster. And the killer had slipped up, leaving a microscopic trail. The reception area was a study in understated wealth, polished marble, abstract art, and a hushed atmosphere that spoke of power. I was there to meet the corporate liaison, a man named Henderson. He met me in a minimalist conference room, all sleek surfaces and panoramic views. Henderson was impeccably dressed, his suit perfectly tailored, his smile practiced and smooth. He offered me artisanal coffee, his gestures fluid and welcoming, almost too welcoming. "Investigator Reid," he began, his voice calm, "please, make yourself comfortable. We at Omnicorp were deeply saddened by Dr. Thorne's untimely demise. A brilliant mind, truly. A great loss to science, and to our shared future." I cut to the chase. "Mr. Henderson, I'm looking into the circumstances surrounding Dr. Thorne's death. Specifically, a material found at the scene. A synthetic polymer, highly specialized. Does Omnicorp have any applications for such a material?" Henderson's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flickered, just for a moment. "Oh, Omnicorp is involved in a vast array of cutting-edge materials science, investigator. We develop polymers for everything from aerospace components to advanced medical devices. We have countless proprietary compounds." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Could you be more specific about this particular polymer? Perhaps its structural properties, its intended use? Its thermal resistance and durability suggest industrial applications, perhaps components for extreme environments," I stated, watching him closely. "It's not something typically found in a biological research lab. Indeed, he conceded, a slight tilt of his head. Dr. Thorne's work was, as you know, highly focused on bioengineering. It would be unusual for him to have such a material on hand. However, we do fund a wide range of research. It's not impossible that some of our other divisions might have provided him with a sample for, say, a new containment vessel prototype. We're always innovating. His explanation was thorough, plausible, and delivered with an almost eager willingness to assist. Too eager. So, Omnicorp acknowledges it's possible this polymer originated from your company? Absolutely, investigator. If you can provide us with the exact specifications, we would be delighted to cross-reference our inventory and RAND logs. We pride ourselves on transparency and cooperation with law enforcement. We want to see justice served for Dr. Thorne. He even offered to assign a dedicated team to help me trace the material within Omnicorp. He was giving me everything I asked for, and more, yet his answers danced around the core of my suspicion. He wasn't denying ownership, he was embracing it, almost absorbing the potential connection before I could fully articulate it as an accusation. It was a classic corporate maneuver, preemptive cooperation to control the narrative. And Dr. Thorne's research, I pressed. What was its status at the time of his death? Was it nearing completion? What were the implications of his final project? Henderson's smile tightened, just imperceptibly. Dr. Thorne's work was, as always, progressing. Its implications are vast, potentially world-changing, as you said. But due to the proprietary nature and the competitive landscape, I'm afraid I can't divulge specifics. Suffice it to say, it was a project of immense value. He paused, then added, to Omnicorp, and to humanity. The evasiveness beneath the veneer of helpfulness was palpable. He was a master of corporate speak, offering platitudes and vague assurances while revealing nothing concrete. The polymer was a thread, and Henderson was trying to weave it into Omnicorp's tapestry of benign innovation, rather than letting it unravel into something more sinister. But I knew better. This trace wasn't just an anomaly, it was a connection. A connection that led straight into the polished halls of Omnicorp, where the stakes were clearly higher than I'd initially imagined. And Henderson, with his overly cooperative demeanor, had just confirmed it. The polymer was a stubborn thread, refusing to be neatly woven into Omnicorp's tapestry of benign innovation. The more I pulled, the more resistance I felt, and the more I became convinced it led somewhere far darker than a simple lab mishap. My focus narrowed, almost obsessively, on its unique molecular structure, the subtle variances that hinted at custom manufacture rather than off-the-shelf procurement. The fluorescence on the polymer shard I'd extracted from Thorne's lab was unmistakable under UV light, a trace element, almost invisible, that I hadn't seen in any standard industrial compound. This wasn't just a variant, it was bespoke. It spoke of intent, of a specific purpose. Someone hadn't just used this material, they'd had it made. My brain buzzed with theories, each more unsettling than the last. The process would be arduous, but the polymer felt like the key, the physical manifestation of the killer's presence, their signature. Leaving the basement, the afternoon sun was a blinding shock after hours in the artificial glow. I blinked, adjusting, and headed for my vehicle. The street was busy, a blur of city traffic. I was halfway across the intersection, mind still replaying electron microscope images, when the roar became a shriek. A black utility vehicle, larger than most, swerved sharply from the lane to my left, its front bumper seeming to swell in my vision. Tires locked, spitting a brief plume of smoke. I reacted on instinct, a primal jolt, throwing myself backward onto the curb, scraping my elbow on the rough concrete. It didn't slow. It accelerated, disappearing around the next corner without so much as a flash of brake lights. I lay there for a second, heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the acrid smell of burnt rubber stinging my nostrils. That wasn't an accident. The driver had veered, aggressively, directly towards me, then vanished without a glance. My mind, usually so rational, struggled to process the sheer audacity of it. Someone had just tried to put me under their wheels. Shaken but more determined than ever, I pushed myself up. My elbow throbbed, a dull ache that served as a physical reminder. This wasn't just about Thorne anymore. It was personal. Back at my small, cramped lab, the incident replayed in my head, a jarring loop. Everything showed green, no anomalies. I walked through the small space, my eyes scanning, searching for anything out of place. A faint, almost imperceptible scuff mark on the polished concrete near my workbench. It wasn't there this morning. A barely visible smudge on the edge of my monitor, like a ghost of a fingerprint wiped clean. It was subtle, almost a trick of my mind, but it was there. Someone had been in my lab. And they'd been careful. Too careful. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was Maya. Can you come to my place? Please? I need to tell you something. I'm scared. The fear in her voice was raw, unvarnished. It cut through my own simmering anger and suspicion. I'm on my way, I said, grabbing my jacket. The near miss, the subtle breach of my lab, they weren't random. They were connected, a message. When I arrived, her apartment was dim, blinds drawn. She sat huddled on her sofa, clutching a mug of tea, her knuckles white. Her eyes were wide, darting, like a cornered animal. I should have said something sooner, she began, her voice trembling. After Thorne died, everything was so chaotic. The corporate security, the police. I just wanted it all to go away. She took a shaky breath. But I kept remembering things. Little things. She paused, swallowing hard. A few weeks before it happened, I was working late. Thorne had this thing about the lab being pristine, so I'd often stay behind to sterilize equipment. One night, I saw someone. Not Thorne. I was in the secondary clean room, just finishing up. I heard the main lab door cycle open, then close. I thought it was Thorne, maybe he'd forgotten something. But then I saw a figure, through the glass partition, moving through the main lab. They were tall. And they had a hood up, so I couldn't see their face. They weren't looking at anything specific, just moving with purpose. Towards Thorne's private research area. Did they see you? I asked, my voice low. I don't think so. I ducked down, just in case. They were only in there for a few minutes, then the door cycled again, and they were gone. I didn't think much of it then. I thought maybe Thorne had a new assistant or something. But after he died, I kept seeing that figure in my head, moving so quietly. And that area. It's where he kept his most sensitive work. His eyes met mine, brimming with unshed tears. I think someone was stealing from him, Reid. The custom polymer, the meticulous explosion, the corporate evasiveness, the attempts on my life. And now, an unknown individual, accessing Thorne's high-security lab after hours, just weeks before his death. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate, calculated act. And someone was trying very hard to keep me from uncovering the truth. The game had just escalated. The pieces had clicked into place with a chilling finality. This wasn't an accident. This was well, the word felt inadequate for the sheer audacity of it. I sat hunched over a bank of monitors, the blue glow painting my face in the dim forensic analysis room. The air hummed with the quiet thrum of servers, each machine a silent witness to digital ghosts. Security logs, environmental control readouts, equipment operational telemetry, every byte was a potential clue, a breadcrumb leading to the truth. The lab's systems were bespoke, designed by Thorne himself, intricate and robust. A casual glance at the logs from the incident date showed nothing amiss. A slight temperature fluctuation, a minor pressure spike, all within expected parameters for a high-intensity experiment. But I wasn't looking for casual. I was looking for the almost imperceptible, the calculated deviations that only an insider would know how to mask. I zoomed in on the environmental controls, specifically the atmospheric composition. Thorne worked with highly volatile compounds, requiring precise gas mixtures. I scrolled through weeks of data, then days, then hours, leading up to the moment of the explosion. There it was, buried deep within a secondary diagnostic log, a ghost in the machine. First, a subtle increase in an inert gas, just enough to slightly dilute the oxygen without triggering immediate alarms. Then, a fractional drop in pressure, insignificant on its own, but part of a larger, deliberate sequence. This wasn't a system malfunction, it was a symphony of sabotage. My internal clock ticked, each second bringing me closer to the grim revelation. The system didn't fail, it was made to fail. And not in a single, dramatic collapse. This was a multi-stage manipulation, designed to mimic a cascade failure. The inert gas introduction would have starved the primary reaction, then the pressure drop would have stressed the containment, and finally, I pulled up the operational data for the specific reactor Thorne was using. Its parameters showed a sudden, inexplicable surge in energy output just moments before the explosion. But the surge wasn't from the reactor, it was to it. An external input, carefully routed, designed to ignite the now compromised atmosphere. It was a digital fuse, lit remotely. The remote access point, the one I traced in the previous days, now made chilling sense. It wasn't just for reconnaissance, it was the launch pad. No alarm tripped, no immediate red flags raised. Just a gradual, insidious shift in the lab's delicate balance, culminating in a violent, engineered release. I pushed back from the monitors, the digital blueprint of the murder etched into my mind. The next step was physical verification. I needed to see if the physical evidence corroborated this intricate digital ballet of destruction. On one table, meticulously laid out, were fragments of the custom polymer, the same material I'd found in the attempted hit. On another, scorched conduits and a section of the reactor's outer casing, warped and discolored. I donned a pair of gloves and leaned closer, my eyes scanning for patterns, for discrepancies. The burn patterns on the polymer were telling. Not a uniform char, as a simple, powerful explosion would create. Instead, there were distinct areas of intense, localized scorching, interspersed with regions of less severe thermal damage, almost as if the material had been subjected to varying degrees of heat over a short period. This aligned perfectly with the digital data, a primary reaction starved of oxygen, then a sudden, externally induced energy spike in a specific zone. The polymer, designed for extreme conditions, wouldn't have simply failed under normal stress. It was forced to fail, its integrity compromised by the carefully orchestrated atmospheric changes. The deformation wasn't from a single, outward blast. It showed signs of implosion in certain areas, consistent with a sudden internal pressure drop, followed by an outward expansion where the final ignition occurred. The metal had twisted and buckled in a way that screamed engineered failure, not accidental overload. The killer hadn't just caused an explosion. They had orchestrated an environmental collapse within the lab, a multi-stage attack designed to destabilize Thorne's highly sensitive research environment. The inert gas, the pressure drop, the targeted energy surge, each step was a calculated move, leading to a fatal event that mimicked a research malfunction. The person who did this possessed an intimate, almost encyclopedic knowledge of Thorne's specific protocols, his bespoke systems, and the intricate dance of variables within his lab. They knew exactly how to twist the controls, how to turn Thorne's own brilliance against him. The individual who accessed the lab weeks before Thorne's death wasn't just scouting, they were setting the stage. They weren't just observing, they were programming the kill switch. I was up against someone brilliant, meticulous, and utterly ruthless. Around me, shelves stretched to the low ceiling, packed with sealed containers, each holding a fragment of someone's story. My story, for the past week, had been Aris Thorne. The initial findings had been a smokescreen, an elaborate illusion of a lab accident. But the inert gas, the precise pressure drop, the targeted energy surge, each piece I'd unearthed screamed intent, not error. It was too complex, too intricate for a simple theft of research. If the killer merely wanted Thorne's data, they could have copied it, extracted it. Why annihilate the entire environment, destroy the very conditions necessary for the work to exist? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a knot tightening in my stomach. The sheer destructive effort pointed to something more profound than intellectual property theft. Someone didn't just want Thorne's work, they wanted it gone. But nestled amongst the dense files, I'd found a folder labeled simply Integrity Protocols. It was an odd designation for what appeared to be personal notes. Clicking it open, I saw a list of dated entries. They started mundane, observations about lab safety, equipment calibration. Then, the tone shifted. Thorne began to express concerns, veiled at first, about the potential for misuse of his discoveries. He wrote about the ethical tightrope he was walking, the unintended consequences of pushing scientific boundaries. It was abstract, almost philosophical, but the underlying anxiety was palpable. I scrolled further, my gaze snagging on a series of entries that were not only encrypted but also nested within several layers of firewalls. My contact, the cybersecurity analyst, had flagged them as particularly robust. Someone really didn't want this seen, Reid, he'd said, his voice flat over the phone. It's not just password protected, it's a full-spectrum digital fortress. I'd sent the files to him hours ago. Now, a new message flashed on my screen. Got it. Took a while. You owe me. My breath hitched. This was it. This was the why. I clicked the attachment, a newly decrypted text file. The first lines hit me like a physical blow. Entry 147.03.22, the data is irrefutable. My primary research, the cellular regeneration matrix, has been co-opted. Omnicorp isn't just funding my work, they're siphoning off my foundational breakthroughs for a separate, undisclosed project. A project I now believe is weaponized. My eyes darted down the screen, devouring each word. Thorne hadn't just suspected, he knew. He had discovered a betrayal of the highest order. Entry 148.03.22, they are using my work to create something abhorrent. A targeted biological agent, designed for rapid deployment and specific, controlled degradation of organic matter. Not healing. Destruction. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't about a new wonder drug or a groundbreaking medical procedure. This was about a weapon. A weapon built on Thorne's own foundational research, twisted into something monstrous. Entry 149.03.22, I cannot allow this to continue. My integrity demands action. I have begun compiling a dossier, cross-referencing their clandestine funding channels with the illicit procurement of specific, regulated compounds. I will expose Omnicorp. I will reveal their true intentions to the authorities, to the scientific community, to the world. The date on that last entry was just 3 days before Thorne's death. 3 days. He had been preparing to blow the whistle on one of the most powerful corporations on the planet, exposing their development of a devastating biological weapon. The killer wasn't just preventing the completion of his ethical research, they were silencing the man who was about to expose their darkest secret. They weren't after his work, they were after his voice. This wasn't just murder. It was a preemptive strike, a desperate act by an entity determined to keep its terrifying secret buried. And now, I held the key to that secret. The tension in the room, previously confined to my own skull, now felt like a palpable pressure, pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. I had just walked into a war zone, and I was holding the enemy's battle plans. Around me, the low murmur of other investigators sifting through their own cases was a constant, dull thrum. I ignored it, my focus absolute on the 3 monitors before me, each displaying a different facet of Aris Thorne's life and death. One screen held the digital access logs for Thorne's research facility, a dizzying scroll of names, timestamps, and biometric entries. The second displayed a database of employee profiles, cross-referenced with their roles, clearances, and recorded skill sets. The third was a mosaic of the forensic data I'd already compiled, the unusual burn patterns, the microscopic residue, the environmental anomalies within the lab that spoke of a meticulously orchestrated catastrophe. I started by isolating all individuals who had access to the facility within the critical window, the 48 hours leading up to Thorne's discovery. The list, initially, was long, a parade of research assistants, security personnel, and corporate representatives. Too many. The destruction of Thorne's lab wasn't a crude act of violence. That required not just access, but a deep, intimate understanding of Thorne's work and the sophisticated systems within his laboratory. I added a new filter to the employee database, expertise in advanced environmental controls, biocontainment protocols, and a proficiency in dismantling complex systems without triggering alarms. The list on the second screen tightened, shedding dozens of names like dead leaves. Now, I had a dozen, maybe 15 individuals. Still too many for a targeted investigation, but a manageable pool for deeper scrutiny. I cross-referenced these remaining names with the security camera footage, both the official feeds and the more clandestine recordings I'd managed to recover from a compromised server. Most were routine. Then I isolated the corporate liaisons. Omnicorp had several representatives assigned to Thorne's project, given the immense financial and strategic investment. One in particular stood out, not for any overt action, but for his almost unnerving composure in the face of the tragedy, and his consistent, albeit subtle, presence in the facility's less monitored zones. The Omnicorp liaison. I pulled up his profile. His name was David Thorne. No relation to Aris, the records indicated. I'd seen him at the scene, offering his condolences to the lead investigator, his expression appropriately somber, but his eyes, I remembered, had been too sharp, too observant for someone merely grieving. My fingers paused over the keyboard. This was the moment I'd been working towards. I initiated a deep background check, pushing past the sanitized corporate records. The initial results were boilerplate: corporate executive, MBA, years of experience in project management. But something in the way he moved, the way he carried himself, had always nodded me. It wasn't the posture of a desk-bound executive. I widened the search parameters, digging into his past affiliations, academic history, any gaps in his employment. The corporate firewalls were formidable, but I knew their weak points. It took time, a full hour of concentrated effort, bypassing layers of encryption and obfuscated data trails. Sweat beaded on my forehead, the tension in my shoulders a dull ache. The air in the basement felt heavier, pressing in. Then, a hit. An obscure reference in an archived news article from nearly 2 decades ago. A small, specialized firm involved in industrial espionage disbanded after a high-profile scandal involving stolen intellectual property from a competing tech giant. The article listed several key operatives who disappeared from public record after the firm's collapse. One name, almost an alias, was connected to David Thorne. A tactical consultant. The details were sparse, scrubbed clean by time and careful management, but the implication was clear: this man wasn't just a corporate liaison. His past was steeped in covert operations, in the precise art of infiltration and sabotage. My gaze snapped back to the list of individuals with the specific expertise for the lab's destruction. David Thorne's profile now shone with a different light. His project management experience could easily encompass coordinating complex, sensitive operations. His understanding of advanced systems was no longer just theoretical. It was practical, honed in the shadows. A cold certainty settled in my gut. Aris Thorne had been preparing to expose Omnicorp's biological weapon research. Not of a panicked amateur, but of a professional, someone with the skill set to execute a precise, devastating act of sabotage. Someone who could meticulously dismantle systems, manipulate environmental controls, and erase tracks. David Thorne. The inside man. He had the access, the motive, and now, undeniably, the specific, specialized skill set to pull off such a sophisticated act of murder. The stakes had just escalated beyond corporate espionage. This was a calculated elimination, and I was holding the thread that led directly to the orchestrator. My next move had to be equally precise. Fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a sickly yellow glow over stacks of evidence boxes, file cabinets, and the sealed containers that held the secrets of so many forgotten lives. My own breath plumed faintly in the cool, stagnant air as I moved, a phantom wisp of determination. I hadn't come here to re-examine the Thorne case files, not directly. My target was a small, innocuous data chip, labeled Project Chimera, Phase 2 data log, nestled within a sealed evidence bag marked with Thorne's case number. It was a fabrication, a ghost in the machine, designed to draw out a killer I was certain was still watching, still calculating. I'd spent days seeding the precinct's internal network with carefully crafted whispers, a digital breadcrumb trail suggesting a reanalysis of this specific chip had revealed a groundbreaking anomaly, a previously overlooked compound signature that pointed to a new, unexpected direction in Thorne's research. It was vague enough to pique curiosity, but specific enough to trigger panic in only one individual, Thorne's brother, the architect of this elaborate deception. I placed the evidence bag back into its designated slot, making sure it was slightly askew, a subtle signal of recent disturbance. Then I retreated, not far, just behind a towering stack of cold case files, their spines brittle with age and neglect. From my vantage, I had a clear view of the main corridor leading into this section of the basement, and more importantly, the low-light camera I'd discreetly installed hours earlier. The camera fed directly to a small monitor I carried, its screen a dull gray glow in the gloom. I checked my watch. Past midnight. The building was a skeleton of its daytime self, quiet save for the distant thrum of the ventilation system and the occasional creak of settling pipes. Perfect. The waiting was always the hardest part, a slow grind on the nerves. My mind replayed the fragments of evidence, the precise burn patterns in Thorne's lab, the almost invisible polymer residue I'd found near the ventilation shaft, a signature I'd painstakingly matched to similar traces at two other accident scenes I'd investigated in recent months, incidents dismissed as industrial mishaps, which had always felt off. My gut had screamed premeditation, and now, the polymer had given me a name. Or rather, a family connection. An hour bled into another. The brother. My breath hitched, a silent, grim satisfaction tightening my chest. He took the bait. He navigated the maze of shelving with a familiarity that spoke volumes, heading directly for Thorne's evidence section. His hand went straight to the slot where I'd left the chip. He pulled it out, his movements quick, efficient. I watched as he produced a small, specialized device, barely larger than his thumb, and connected it to the chip. He wasn't just observing, he was attempting to overwrite, to corrupt the phantom data I created. His eyes, even in the low resolution of the camera, darted nervously around the room, a predator on edge. This was my moment. The brother froze, his head snapping up. His device clattered to the floor, forgotten. A mask of feigned innocence quickly crumbling into something desperate. Suspicions? I heard a noise. Just checking on things. He gestured vaguely at the shelves. You heard a noise and decided to overwrite evidence? I countered, gesturing to the chip still clutched in his hand and the device on the floor. The Project Chimera, Phase 2 data log chip, to be exact. The one that, according to my carefully circulated false lead, held a groundbreaking anomaly that would expose everything. His jaw worked. A muscle twitching. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I walked slowly towards him, stopping just a few feet away. The trace polymer. The one found in Thorne's lab, near the ventilation system. A unique signature, almost invisible, designed to degrade quickly. But not quickly enough for me. I paused, letting that sink in. I found it at the scenes of 2 other accidents in the last 6 months. Incidents involving individuals who were, by coincidence, also associated with Omnicorp's less public projects. Projects Aris Thorne was beginning to scrutinize. His gaze dropped, avoiding mine. He knew. The game was over. This polymer, I continued, pressing the advantage, it's a proprietary compound. Used to seal high-pressure conduits in specific, experimental environments. Environments I now know you had access to. The same environment where you manufactured a controlled, catastrophic failure in your brother's lab. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Defeated. He was going to ruin everything, he choked out, the words a ragged confession. He was going to expose it all. Expose what? I demanded. Leaning in, my voice low and urgent. He slumped against a metal shelf, the fight draining from him. Omnicorp. Not the public face. A faction. Deep within. They tasked me. Aris was getting too close to their bioweapon development. He found something, a flaw, an ethical red line they'd crossed. They promised me everything. Funding. A seat at the table. To surpass Aris. He looked at me, a flicker of something almost human in his eyes. I just wanted to be seen, Reid. Bioweapon development. This wasn't just about a brother's jealousy or corporate espionage. The polymer was just the first thread. I had pulled it, and now, the entire tapestry of deceit was starting to unravel. The phrase echoed, a cold, hard truth that had settled deep in my bones: bioweapon development. It wasn't just a corporate secret, it was a global threat, the kind that reshaped geopolitics and ended lives on an unimaginable scale. I stood before a steel table, illuminated by a harsh overhead lamp, the final pieces of the puzzle laid out before me. A petri dish containing the modified biological agent, its growth pattern subtly different from Dr. Thorne's original strain. A magnified image of the burn pattern on the lab's floor, precisely where the explosion had originated, showing an accelerant that wasn't part of the standard lab chemicals. And then, the microscopic fibers, barely visible to the naked eye, retrieved from the melted remains of Dr. Thorne's lab coat, fibers identical to those found on a discarded pair of gloves in the younger Thorne's private locker at Omnicorp. The evidence, once disparate, now wove into an undeniable tapestry of intent and execution. My colleague, a detective with weary eyes and a perpetually rumpled suit, leaned against a nearby filing cabinet, observing my meticulous review. "You're sure, Reid?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper in the sterile air. "This changes everything." I looked up, meeting his gaze. "I'm sure. The signature is unmistakable. Thorne's work and the lab's security protocols. Only one other person had that level of access and understanding. He understood the potential, saw the path to immense power and profit, and he was willing to eliminate anyone who stood in his way, even his own kin." The next few hours were a blur of coordinated action. The room was tense, filled with the clipped voices of authority figures, the rustle of papers, and the low buzz of a projector displaying my forensic slides. When the apprehension order was issued, it happened swiftly. I wasn't present for the actual moment, but the call came in less than an hour later. David Thorne, taken into custody at his Omnicorp office, offered no resistance. He knew what he had done, and he had almost gotten away with it. The dam broke. With David Thorne apprehended, the wider conspiracy began to unravel with alarming speed. Federal agents, armed with warrants stemming from my evidence and additional intelligence, descended upon Omnicorp. High-profile arrests followed in quick succession. Corporate executives whose financial dealings hinted at illicit funding for the bioweapon project, security chiefs who had deliberately sabotaged investigations, and even a board member implicated in the cover-up. The sheer scale of it was staggering, a web of greed and ambition that had permeated the highest echelons of the corporation. The media storm that erupted was unprecedented. News channels splashed headlines across every screen, detailing the horrific nature of the bioweapon development and the calculated murder of Dr. Aris Thorne. Public shock turned quickly to outrage. There were protests outside Omnicorp's gleaming headquarters, demands for accountability, and fervent ethical debates about the unchecked advancement of scientific research and corporate responsibility. My name, once just a footnote in forensic reports, was suddenly being mentioned on television, linked to the meticulous work that had brought down a titan. I watched a news report on a small monitor in the corner of the forensic lab, the volume low. A pundit was passionately discussing the implications, the dangers of privatized research, the moral compass of science. It was a necessary conversation, long overdue. But for me, the immediate fallout was a profound sense of exhaustion mixed with a quiet satisfaction. The truth, however ugly, had been brought to light. Yet, the resolution was far from complete. The future of Dr. Thorne's groundbreaking research now hung precariously in the balance. The original, benevolent applications of his work, the medical breakthroughs, the agricultural advancements, were inextricably linked to the weaponized variant. Governments and international organizations, alerted to the global implications, were already vying for control. The initial reports indicated intense diplomatic pressure, clandestine meetings, and the looming threat of intellectual property disputes on an international scale. I knew my part was largely over. The evidence was presented, the perpetrator identified, the conspiracy exposed. But the ripples of this case would spread for years, perhaps decades. The world had glimpsed the potential for a new kind of horror, born from genius and twisted by avarice. The tension, though different now, still lingered, a phantom weight in the air. Dust motes danced in the stale air, catching the cold gleam of the overhead fixtures as I ran a gloved finger over the label of a sealed evidence box. Thorne, Aris, Lab Debris, Section C. It was the last of it, ready for long-term storage, a final act of bureaucratic archiving that felt profoundly inadequate for the magnitude of what lay within. The past few weeks had blurred into a relentless pursuit, an intricate unraveling that had demanded every ounce of my attention. My initial instincts, those faint signals in the noise of a supposed accident, had proven chillingly accurate. The microscopic trace, the unusual burn pattern, they had been the first threads, leading me through a labyrinth of corporate firewalls and academic rivalries, ultimately to the individual who had orchestrated Aris Thorne's demise. I picked up a clear plastic bag containing a fragment of a circuit board, no larger than my thumbnail, its delicate green lines scorched black in one corner. This small piece, once part of a proprietary control system, had been a crucial link. Its specific failure signature, combined with the unique molecular residue I'd painstakingly isolated, had painted a picture of deliberate sabotage disguised as catastrophic malfunction. It wasn't just a miscalculation, it was a weaponized understanding of Thorne's own security protocols, his own genius turned against him. The perpetrator, a former colleague driven by a toxic cocktail of professional jealousy and financial desperation, had exploited Thorne's trust and his cutting-edge work to eliminate a perceived obstacle. They hadn't just wanted Thorne gone, they wanted his research, the culmination of his life's dedication, to be their own. I turned the bag in my hand, the circuit board glinting faintly. It wasn't the brute force of a street crime, this was intellectual violence, a calculated dissection of another mind's vulnerabilities. It spoke to a profound corruption, where the pursuit of knowledge, meant to elevate humanity, could be twisted into a tool for destruction. The lead investigator had looked at me, a silent acknowledgement of the depth of depravity we'd uncovered. The federal agents, their faces grim, had understood the wider implications for national security, for the delicate balance of scientific progress. Thorne's project, initially seen as a beacon of hope, had become a stark reminder of the perils inherent in unchecked ambition. The truth, once revealed, had been a heavy burden. I'd spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, replaying the sequence of events, not just the physical actions of the perpetrator, but the psychological landscape that allowed such a betrayal to flourish. It wasn't just Thorne who had paid the price, it was the trust within the scientific community, the very ethics of innovation. Each piece of evidence I had meticulously documented, each microscopic fiber and chemical signature, had brought me closer to this uncomfortable truth, leaving me with a sense of profound closure for Thorne, but an equally profound unease about the world he inhabited. A colleague, a younger investigator who had assisted on some of the more tedious evidence sorting, walked past, nodding curtly. "All boxed up, Reid. Good work." "Thanks," I murmured, my voice a little rough. I placed the circuit board fragment back into its container, sealing the lid with a definitive click. The case was closed, at least my part of it. The legal machine would now grind forward, processing the mountain of evidence, ensuring accountability. Justice, in its slow, methodical way, would be served. But the questions lingered. How many more brilliant minds, like Thorne's, pushed the boundaries of what was possible, only to become targets? My gaze drifted across the rows of shelved boxes, each one a sealed narrative of crime and consequence. Others were recent, still humming with the echoes of their stories. My work here was done, for now. Thorne's legacy, though tarnished by the manner of his death, would endure, his research secured and protected from those who would misuse it. As I turned to leave the cool, sterile environment of the basement, the familiar buzz of my secure communication device vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, the screen displaying a new case file, encrypted and marked with the highest priority. The title was vague, deliberately so, but the keywords hinted at another complex web of advanced technology and human malevolence. The struggle, I realized, was ongoing. The fight for forensic justice wasn't just about identifying a killer, it was about safeguarding the fragile balance between human ambition and human responsibility. And I, with my meticulous eye for detail and my unwavering commitment to the truth, would continue to stand on that line, ready for whatever twisted narrative the next case might present. The hum of the lights followed me up the stairs, a constant reminder that the work, the endless pursuit of clarity in the face of chaos, never truly ended.